Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Heaney Keith.
Here.
Nash. Willetts.
Here.
4 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. And first up, Eric is with us to go over some interim budget changes. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of council. We have 14 interim budget changes for your consideration this afternoon. The majority of those IBCs are in the enterprise funds. And I'll note that the first 8 of them are all related to airport capital projects or airport projects. The first item is an increase associated with airport bond interest. This increase is related to 2 series of bond debt that were issued for the construction of the employee and the public parking garages. These bond interest expenses were not budgeted in fiscal year 23, given the timing of the bond issuances, but they were included in the fiscal year 24 proposed budget. The next item is for airport road improvements. This increase would be offset by savings from the Taxi Lane N project, which is complete and had a remaining budget. The third item is for the East De-ice and Cargo Apron Rehabilitation Project, which is in need of funding due to higher than anticipated construction costs and a necessary utility relocation. The increase for this project would also be offset by a reduction to the Taxi Lane N project. The fourth airport item is for the Economy Parking Lot Improvements Project. Additional funding is needed within that project for utility and design related costs, as well as to relocate the existing lateral irrigation ditch. Funding for that increase would also come from the Taxi Lane N project. Our fifth item is the Terminal Cooling Tower Relocation Project. This $2.5 million adjustment would cover higher than budgeted costs for the equipment associated with the cooling tower, as well as construction administration costs and certain inspection related costs. The funding for this project would come from the Taxiway D and Taxi Lane A3 relocation projects, both of which have available budget. The sixth airport item is for the Terminal Facility Upgrade Project. An increase to that project is required to accommodate higher than budgeted costs for the skylight replacement and for rotunda art support. Funding for that project would come from the SkyWest Apron construction project, which was canceled and has available funding. The next item is for the ticket lobby expansion. This $375,000 increase is required for design work, primarily related to tying the new baggage system into the existing baggage system. Funding for that project would also come from the Taxi Lane N project. And the final airport related project is for the utility infrastructure development project. An increase is required there due to higher design, construction, and utility costs. Funding for that project would come from the Taxi Lane D rehabilitation project, which was completed and has available funding. Moving past the airport, our ninth IBC for consideration is for Primrose Park. This increase, this $400,000 increase, which would be funded by development impact fees in the North River Park planning area, would address higher than budgeted costs associated with building out the park according to the park's master plan. The use of development impact fees was approved by the Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee on July 12th of this year. Our 10th item is for the zoo necropsy building for $37,000. That project is in need of additional funding due to higher than budgeted costs. An expansion of that building is required in order to maintain the zoo's various accreditations, as the current building is too small to accommodate larger animals. Our 11th item is to support administrative costs for the Community Development Block Grant Fund, as well as our home fund. This adjustment would transfer undesignated funds from the Housing Projects and Special Activities Fund to support administrative costs within the CDBG and home funds. I'll note that there is budget authority available within those funds, but federal reimbursement limits have been reached, and there is not sufficient fund balance to support those costs absent this transfer. Our 12th item is an advancement of funding for police patrol vehicles. We had allocated $1.7 million as part of the fiscal year 24 budget. However, due to the timing of the order bank being open, the order bank will be open in September. We need to advance those funds into the current fiscal year. A subsequent IBC would be brought forward for City Council consideration in fiscal year 24 to remove the fiscal year 24 allocation. Similar to that, a recommendation to advance funding for the Warm Springs Historic Streetlights project is recommended. Advancing those funds into fiscal year 23 will allow for more of that work to be completed before we reach the winter season. A subsequent IBC will be brought forward for council consideration to remove the FY24 funding after the approval of the FY24 budget. And our last item is for the West Boise Communications Center. An increase to that project is needed to cover higher than budgeted labor and material costs associated with installing power conduits and vaults, as well as to prepare the facility for centralized standby power. The offset for that increase would be a reduction to the West Boise Secondary Capacity Project, which also has available funding. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions the council might have.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if there's no questions, I would move approval of the interim budget changes, items number 1 through 14.
Second.
We have a motion and second discussion. Clark?
Agent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Ash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thanks, Eric. All right, and now we have Nikki Hellenkamp from my office to go over fee deferrals and exemptions for affordable housing. Welcome, Nikki. You can go ahead and start.
Okay, so I'm here today to bring you a background and an update on the city's work to reduce fees for affordable housing development, including an ordinance change that will be on your agenda tonight for first reading. As we've said before, the city is really taking an all of the above approach to housing affordability and access, including setting goals for construction and preservation of affordable homes, including affordability incentives in our zoning code, and piloting innovative approaches related to ADUs and tiny homes. And in this spirit, we've also been exploring a strategy around reducing development costs for affordable homes by deferring and exempting the city's fees that are associated with development. We know that affordable housing construction is really challenging and that larger market forces like construction costs and interest rates have a outsized impact on the feasibility of those projects. But the city does also have a role to play in terms of reducing the barriers that we create, including the fees that we charge. If my slides are up, I would now move to slide 2, but then you'd miss the beautiful picture on my cover slide. I'll go ahead and move it along. Is that, oh, she's gone. Okay, I'll just keep it moving in the interest of time. So in terms of our goals here, if you could see the slide, you would see 3 different goals outlined. The first is predictable funding. We know that predictability is really key when it comes to affordable housing development. And what I mean by predictability is having really clear criteria around the types of projects that qualify and providing those making them available on the developer's timeline, not through a predetermined funding round. So sometimes affordable housing developers will call this over the counter, meaning that as long as you meet the criteria in terms of the affordability requirements that are needed and any other requirements, then you can rely on being able to access this incentive, or in this case, this fee waiver or exemption, or excuse me, exemption or deferral. This type of exemption or deferral would also demonstrate local commitment to these kinds of projects, which can be helpful on tax credit applications or other types of funding that an affordable housing project may be applying to as well. The second goal that's outlined in the slide is supporting a range of affordable housing. So these kinds of exemptions and waivers can be used for large multifamily, smaller homeownership projects, as well as a range of incomes targeted. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And the last of the goals is to amplify the zoning code incentives around affordability by really trying to match them. So we'll get into that a little bit more as well. They're saved to the. Okay. So on this slide, what you can't see is a beautiful rendering of an affordable housing project with nearly 100 units, which is set to break ground this month on city-owned land at State and Arthur. And what you'd see broken out are the city's fees that we charge, broken into 3 categories. Impact fees, which on the State and Arthur project, which again, you're talking about around 100 affordable units. Those impact fees were just under $275,000. For our building permit and development fees, that's the next category, they were just over $220,000. And on our sewer connection fees, just over $200,000. So in total, city fees on this project were $699,900.81. So as we are looking at those fees and asking a question around no problem. As we're looking at those fees and asking the question around, is there something we can do to address this $700,000 that the city is charging on fees for this affordable housing development that very much meets our goals around affordability? I want to highlight our progress on the strategy so far. So the first of those was impact fees. And as you know, we were able to move forward a short-term impact fee deferral option through internal policy change. The way that a short-term impact fee deferral would work is that it's paid when a building receives its certificate of occupancy rather than at permit issuance, which is a difference of usually about 18 months to 2 years. Doing this means that a developer can avoid putting those fees on their construction loan, which involves accruing interest on them for up to 2 years during that period of construction, and to instead pay the fees closer in time to when they'll be moving residents in. So you're still talking about the affordable housing developer paying the fees and paying them relatively quickly, but it does reduce some of that upfront cost. In terms of the building permit and development fees, which is the second of the 3 types of fees in that image you can't see, the change there will allow both short-term deferrals and exemptions, and that's included in this year's update to the fee schedule, which is on your second reading calendar for tonight. So that's what gives the ability to do that. And finally, the sewer connection fee deferral is a longer-term deferral. This requires an ordinance change, which, as I mentioned, will be on tonight's first reading calendar. So essentially what we have tried to devise here is a 2-tiered system that with greater incentives associated with deeper levels of affordability. So we've got 2 categories of affordable housing projects. One is projects that meet the zoning code's affordability incentive criteria by having at least 25% of their units affordable at 80% AMI for rental, 120% AMI for homeownership. So what we're essentially saying is, look, if you're meeting our zoning code affordability incentives, we can also offer you this short-term deferral on both your impact fees and your building permit and development fees, where we can defer them for 2 years. You can pay them at certificate of occupancy, and it addresses a little bit of that upfront pain. The second tier is for more deeply affordable projects in which at least half of the units are affordable at 60% AMI or below for rental or 100% AMI or below for homeownership. So for these more deeply affordable projects, they would be eligible for their building permit and development fees to be exempted altogether, meaning that there would be no expectation that they be paid back in the future. And with the ordinance change before you, those types of projects would also be eligible for a long-term deferral of their sewer connection fees, which we'll get into now. So currently under city code, restaurants and breweries are already have the ability to have their sewer connection fees deferred. So this would just add affordable housing as an allowable category and would also include a repayment structure that's specific to the financing needs of those projects. Specifically, we would be looking at a 17-year deferral, which in our discussions with affordable housing providers in the development of this ordinance, they shared that in terms of the way those projects specifically are typically financed, that 17-year period would be something that would make sense and that they have used in other jurisdictions with this type of deferral. It also would only apply to multifamily projects, whereas the other exemptions and deferrals we've discussed could be used for projects of any size. So again, apologies for the technical difficulties on my end, but the sewer connection fee ordinance is on your first reading calendar for tonight, and I'm happy to stand for any questions you might have related to it or the other fee deferrals and exemptions that we've discussed.
Madam Mayor, first of all, Nikki, great job explaining the complicated thing without any slide assistance. You did wonderful. You had said something about folks being eligible for an exemption, and I was wondering if you could maybe just kind of give us a snapshot of what that process would look like. Is it somebody who meets the requirements and then they apply for something, and then we have a objective way of saying yes, no? How does the eligibility work?
Mayor, Council President Halliburton, yes, that's exactly how it would work. We would have very clear criteria spelled out in policy. And this is something we're excited about. There is a position within PDS that it's Joe Bruce, and his job is very much to work with folks who are trying to bring affordable housing online and to make sure they're aware of these are the incentives that are out there. Here's how we can get you through this application process, right? Here's what the criteria will be. And if you meet the criteria and you apply and we verify that you meet the criteria, then you would be able to get that exemption or deferral.
Perfect.
That's
Thank
how
you.
it would work.
Madam Mayor. Not a question, but just a comment. I really appreciate the continued focus on trying to come up with creative solutions to ensure that we have affordable housing. We know the market forces right now across the nation, but here in Idaho and in Boise specifically are really putting a damper on our ability to make this happen. So I'm really just thankful that the team is continuing to look at the many different options we have in front of us. And I think that this is another one of those levers that we can pull that hopefully gets that kind of development here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, Nikki, walk us through what a developer is saving if they're part of the 60% AMI or the 100% AMI, and they basically have all fees waived. What does that look like in dollars and cents? And then also, what does it look like if the sewer is delayed over 17 years?
Sure. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willett, thank you. If I would go back to my slide that broke out the fees, but I'll say them verbally. So impact fees would only the short-term deferral is available even for that more deeply affordable project. So they're still paying I'm going to round them all to $200,000 just for, that's not correct, but we're going to use it for purposes of illustration. So $200,000 impact fees, you're still paying at certificate of occupancy, even for that more deeply affordable project. On the building permit and development fees, to really get into the weeds here, since you asked the question, on our building permit and development fees, that project would, by our criteria, qualify for an exemption of their specifically planning and development services portion of that fees, which for this project is about 87% of those development services fees. The other ones are like very weird public works fees, like streetlight inspection, things like that. So they would have about 87% of that 200,000 exempted. And then on the sewer connection side, that additional essentially 200,000, they would be able to have that deferred out for 17 years, at which point the full amount would be due.
And Mayor, follow up. Thank you. And I know this is really hard because we're talking numbers without having the benefit of actually looking at them. So in terms of doing this, I mean, I think it's a great idea because it just incentivizes folks. How are we as a city going to make up for the lost revenue when it comes to, the fees? Because we all see these fees, we enact these fees, and then they all go to things that we all appreciate.
Absolutely, Mayor, Councilmember, that's something we've had a lot of conversation around, and particularly with, impact fees. Of course, you want to have the parks, police, and everything else that comes with that neighborhood, which is a big part of why we're just looking at that short-term deferral. In terms of the budget impact of the others, they're only, as I said, available for those more deeply affordable projects, which in looking at what we expect to be coming forward at that level of affordability, there just aren't actually that many of them, which in the big picture is a bad thing. And in the picture of the city's budget and these fee exemptions is like, it means that our budget office had a level of comfort with saying this actually isn't very many projects that would actually qualify under these more restrictive criteria. And in some future world, there might be so many deeply affordable units coming online that we'd want to look at that differently, but that isn't our current reality. And so given the number of projects that we expect to see in the next 5-6 years, it was something that they felt comfortable with in terms of the budget impact.
Madam Mayor, one more.
Yes, thank you. So the estimated number that we went with was $500,000 in the neighborhood. And that's an estimate based on what we see in our pipeline coming forward.
And Nikki, just to follow up on that, are these, so for the deeply affordable ones, the reason that you're able to predict how many we might have, is that also because, one, there are some in the pipeline, but are these the projects that look to having tax credits? And so there's a limited number of tax credits that are available in our state and in our community. And that gives us a sense of how many projects we might see moving forward in order to budget. So it's not, we'd like to see more, but the reality is with the capital stack, you need that tax credit. And so we have a sense of how few there will be.
Mayor, that's exactly correct. To reach this level of affordability in our state currently is almost impossible without low-income housing tax credits. And so we're able to use the tax credit availability to, just as you said, have a sense of what we could expect as the upward limit of what might be coming online in the coming years.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks
Very much. I really appreciate the work on this. It was a while ago, we said be as creative as possible and come up with some solutions, and council wanted to see it too. And you and the team have done that. So thank you. All right. Oh, we're going to take a break so that you don't have to try to describe every slide that you likely have, because I think that you were next. Oh, we've got it ready. Oh, great. All right. Never mind. We've got it ready. So next up, we have what we're doing here is, it looks like Dennis is presenting. Dennis Mazzaros, is that you both are? Okay. And Chris Roth from St. Luke's also. And we've asked St. Luke's to come in and present the master plan that this council and community weighed over many, many months and maybe years, quite a while ago. And with COVID and other things that have happened, there have been some slight delays in the steps that the hospital expected to take. And so we asked that now that they're ready to take the steps, that they come back to us to review the overarching master plan that was approved by the city. And then we'll have some specific conversations about pieces that were approved and agreed to as part of this, was it the CUP? Back in the day, was it a CUP? No, it was the adoption of Blueprint Boise. Okay. And so the different pieces that were agreed to at that point, we're going to review it all, because moving forward, starting today, there will be steps that will be taken that were expected to happen, but it's just been so long since the council has had this conversation. Come on up. And welcome. Can we, I don't know if.
How about that?
Oh,
There we
you're
go.
on.
Okay. Madam Mayor, council members, good afternoon. I'm Chris Roth. I serve as President and CEO of St. Luke's Health System. It's been a number of years since I've been before this group, and on behalf of my team and our organization, really looking forward to providing you an update today on the comprehensive master plan related to the development and investment in our Boise hospital and related structures, as well as ultimately to grant the city of Boise easement through the Bannock corridor that will provide public access on an ongoing basis. The granting of the easement is I don't want to say it's the final step, but it's a critical step in the next phase of what will be a $1.2 to $1.4 billion investment in our downtown Boise hospital. Those of you that recall discussions 8 years ago, that number was a lot smaller, but inflation and time and all of those things. But as you will see, there's been a tremendous amount of work over the past few years, and there's a lot of work ahead. So we're looking forward to this dialogue, and we'll be here to answer any questions. This is a very complex project, lots of moving parts and pieces. We'll do our best to stay pretty high level and not overwhelm you with the details, but we're here standing by to provide you any information that you need. Relative to the agenda today, I'm going to turn it over here in just a moment. You'll first hear from Dennis Masaros. Dennis is one of our vice presidents who oversees all operations in Boise, Mountain Home, and McCall. He really is an expert in this project, and we'll go over the scope, what we've done today, and more importantly, what's ahead. Then you'll hear from Kristen Losey from Tool, as she'll introduce herself and her team. Tool's been involved working with St. Luke's and the city, really, and the neighborhood associations around the design of the Bannock corridor and the testing, and lots of information to share there and lots of input we received from the committee. And then finally, you'll hear from Jordan Heller. Jordan is deputy counsel at St. Luke's. She also importantly oversees all of our real estate portfolio and holdings. I do want to acknowledge that Jordan's stepping in on behalf of Joanne Butler, who sadly passed away a couple days ago recently. Joanne would want us to be here to talk about this project. I know many of you have worked with Joanne. I think arguably she's the best land use attorney in the state of Idaho. We'll miss her, but we're here in spirit with Joanne. So with that, with Joanne and Mike and family, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Madam Mayor, council members. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, there it is. I can see him right in front of me. Yeah, can everyone hear me? Hey, the goals that I have in terms of walking through the master facility plan is ensuring that the mayor and the council have an understanding of the why we're embarking in this journey. Secondly, review the scope that are tied to guiding principles, specifically reducing patient friction through an integrated design, improving clinical efficiency, workflows, ever more important with the labor issues that we're having, protect a community asset, very specifically looking at some of the services that are unique to this campus, neurosciences, heart and vascular cancer, and the Children's Hospital. But I do want to provide with an overview of what we're talking about. There's a lot of activity down between Bannock and Jefferson and First and Avenue B. So I'll walk through the campus just for an orientation. Better? Awesome. So what you see in front of you, and I'll just start with the legend. You'll see that the work that was completed after the city approved the master facility plan back in 2015. And to date, the spend has been about $260 million. And then you'll see in green the work that is in progress that will be completed about 2029. And that's at a spend of $1.2 billion. And up at the top at 12 o'clock, you'll see the existing tower that's been cobbled together since 1927 through 2001, 10 stories. To the right of that is the South Tower. So those are the buildings that are right on the Bannock corridor. We opened the Bannock corridor in 2019 for multi-use, and Kristen will be talking a little bit about the function of that. We put the cycle track around the campus in 2019, opened shipping and receiving in 2021. central utility plant and the parking structure with 1,100 additional spaces was also opened in 21. And then I'm just going to go to the 8 o'clock area right now. And you can see in terms of Avenue B, the additional roundabout that was added relative to some of the infrastructure that we had to put in place. And then also in 2019, the Children's Pavilion with the important connector that moves patients and clinicians across Avenue B into the hospital. Back at the bottom of the page, you'll see the medical office building, which is at First and Jefferson, 6 stories to be completed in 2029. The bridge over First Street, 2029, an important connector again from parking to the MOP, the Medical Office Plaza, and then if needed into the main hospital. The main entrance will shift from Bannock to First and State, and then the new North Tower completed in 2029, 9 stories, lower than the existing tower by about 30 feet. So that's the orientation of the overall master plan upon completion. I'll go to the next slide. Just for some macro context, it's important to share that St. Luke's Health System is Idaho's largest private employer with over 15,000 employees. We provide care at hospitals and clinics throughout Idaho and eastern Oregon. The medical center downtown is a tertiary referral hospital and the only children's hospital within the state of Idaho. We have 400 beds. 113 children's beds, and our beds have become often full. Annually, we admit over 21,000 patients, including 2,000 pediatric admissions from all areas of Idaho and beyond for cancer services, cardiac services, and trauma care. We average more than 100 patients per day in the emergency department. And when the pediatric trauma service opened in 2022, we quickly saw an uptick of 9,000 pediatric trauma patients in 2022 alone. And ever more important in light of the bus incident back on August 1st, having the services locally in this community is a critical asset. In addition to providing healthcare services, St. Luke's Health System and the Boise Hospital is an important economic engine within the state of Idaho. The Boise Hospital employs over 3,600 community members at an average wage that is 60% higher than the state's average wage. Next slide, please. Now, talking about demand for care, Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the country. Within our communities of service, the population is growing fast. By 2034, 18% growth is expected. The population is also aging faster, 37% growth in the 60-plus population, the high utilizers of healthcare services. It's a data point, but I think we can all relate to it relative to our personal experiences, commute times, reservations, and the costs we're incurring. Now, concurrent with the population growth, we're also seeing a demand for tertiary or subspecialty care. Those services are unique to the Boise campuses. Neurosciences, thoracic surgery, vascular gynecology, and oncology services, in addition to pediatric, orthopedics, and general surgery, they have each increased by over 20%. Now, within the community, many of these services are not duplicated at other hospitals. So the Boise Hospital's expertise is a core competency for these services. It draws patients from a very broad geographic area. Next slide, please. If you were not aware, Idaho ranks the lowest relative to beds per capita in the country. We're actually 6th lowest. In summary, we have a bed shortage. There's not enough beds for the population in this town. What you see also is a heat map that is up there, and that's a Boise heat map. And just to simplify it, red is not good. Red indicates that our beds are full. In 2022, our occupancy rate exceeded 82%. The bed target for planning, the need for additional beds at 75%. So we're already short the beds that we need to service the community members. If by 28 we don't add additional beds, we'll be running at 92%, and we'll see more patients needing to travel out of town or even out of state for healthcare services. So we are at a point where it's critical to add capacity on our campus. Next slide, please. A lot of detail here, but I'm going to summarize it with a brief orientation. You can see in the middle of the slide where the roundabout is for Reserve and going up Avenue B. You'll see right beneath that is where we have an empty lot where we took down the old central utility plant in addition to HR buildings that were there. And then you'll see a patchwork there of different colors, and that reflects the campus and the campus efforts to the system efforts to increase capacity on that structure from 2021. From 1921 through 2001. We're at a point where we have aging infrastructure where it prohibits growth in place. We have operating rooms that are below grade, often flood. We have ORs that are landlocked, operating rooms that are landlocked. We cannot accommodate the growth that we're seeing. We have inadequate ceiling heights within those operating rooms, so we can't accommodate increased technology such as robotics for minimally invasive surgery. And we have inpatient rooms that are not able to fit needed equipment, such as overhead lifts for our staff safety. We also have 72 beds that are no longer meeting code that we have to bring up to code or put them out of service as we look at additional construction activity. In 2001, excuse me, we completed our first phase of the master facility plan, and that's up there in the red, the orange, the blue, and the green. And that is the new central utility plant with updated generators, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, electrical power, and critical environmental stewardship takeaways. We reduced our utility spend in electricity by 21% per square foot, gas by 26%, and sewer by 31%. We also added the additional parking, shipping, and receiving, and we pulled a lot of the delivery activity off of the main roads and put them off-road onto loading and delivery docks. Next slide, please. So what you see here is a completed campus shaped by years of planning and investment. And just in terms of the view you can see in terms of First Street, State Street, and coming around Fort, if you were to make that left turn. Design principles protect community access to care, ensure patient continuity, reduce friction, and clinical efficiency. We accomplish this through an integrated design that connects physician offices to diagnostic ancillary services, procedural, and inpatient care. During our design sessions, it was a critical physician ask to ensure that there was access that was horizontally connecting patients and care teams. The bridge connects the existing tower to the new tower, similar to what we see in pediatrics. This responds to the community need by adding 80 additional beds. It also adds additional surgical capacity with 7 additional ORs and 2 additional procedural areas. Next slide, please. So our next steps in terms of moving forward, I'll just pause and say this has been an extremely busy year with dozens of clinical teams engaged in design. The size of the rooms, the location of the equipment, we mocked up and did walkthroughs of patient rooms and operating rooms to ensure that we had it right. That was in advance of working through our construction documents. Listed here are the major milestones. The next spend is about $30 million, and that's listed in the make-ready projects. Everything from our floodplain redesignation, because we have an opportunity for a letter of map revision relative to the neighborhood there. We're looking at a move of the ambulance entrance, again, establishing a construction yard for the activity, and then north wing reinforcements. We're going to preserve a 1971's building, and in order to connect the 2 towers, we've got to drop about 70-foot pylons through that top of the building into our infrastructure. And then we'll look at 24 in terms of being the big dig, the mass excavation starts. And then in 25, you'll start to see the skeleton of the building rise. This by no means is a small project, multiple years that will require working closely with the city, with the neighborhood, with ACHD, as well as with our caregiver teams. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we're committed to a partnership with the city of Boise. Look forward to continuing to provide high-level services to the community here. And I will stand for any questions before I turn it over to Kristen Losey.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Really detailed presentation. I just wanted to make sure I understood that if with this new build and talking about the numbers of what we're seeing with the growth in Boise, how close will we be in terms of the number of beds to meet the demand? Will we be at that 75% level or will we be higher than that?
It's a great question. Our planning horizon was 2034. So that is one challenge that we have. We're bumping up closer to that planning horizon than we thought we would. We have 3 shelled floors, so we'll be able to add additional beds if demand is there. But I think it's important also to share that this is an end strategy. acute care services is not the only solution to pulling down the demand for inpatient care. So a primary care strategy, remote patient management, offering telehealth, those are all critical strategies that we have to embrace as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, first of all, I want to say sorry to your entire team. I heard the news about Joanne earlier today, and it's heartbreaking. I'm sure you're all hurting, and I do appreciate you all being here and continuing to move forward. When you get to the big dig phase, as you called it, do we anticipate closures on State Street or long-term closures of any roads surrounding St. Luke's?
Madam Mayor, Council President Halliburton, we anticipate using Jefferson in our current area in order to do that dig. So we do not anticipate closing. We will have to close first for parts of the time when we're doing some of the construction over that, but we are not planning on closing State.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. Chris.
Right, can you hear me all right? Yes, all right. Madam Mayor and council members, I am pleased to be here with you to share the results of the Bannock corridor testing. And this is what I'm going to cover. Next slide, please. This is what I'm going to cover. I'm going to do a quick introduction, talk about shared street design and the testing summary and results. Next slide.
And also, Jessica's happy to do the slides, but there's a little clicker right there.
Oh.
If that's easier for you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. All
Should have
right,
said that
thank
earlier. Sorry, Dennis.
you. Thank you.
Never mind, it's not working today.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right, thank you. So Tool Design is a national firm specializing in the design of streets for bicycles and pedestrians. As an urban designer, these are the kind of projects that I specialize in, ones that have a big focus on the user experience. So projects that marry civil engineering with placemaking. I'm also the co-author of the original design guidance for shared streets. This image on the right is the FHWA guide for accessible shared streets. So all that to say, we come with credentials in engineering, planning, and urban design. Next slide. So this is just a quick slide to show that there has been a long history of third-party input on this project. And I put MOU here, but really what I meant was the letter agreement from 2016. So I'm not going to go into this. I just want to demonstrate that there have been numerous organizations and firms that have been involved in the project over time. Next slide. I have been on this project since 2017, so 6 years. And my engagement in the project involvement has been in 3 distinct phases. So the first phase was from 2019. It was a community engagement phase. After that letter agreement, we built consensus about how Bannock could look and function. Following that, I worked on the concept design with the community, with the council. I was involved in the council resolution. Tool Design did the 30% design of the corridor. We turned it over to the land group who did the final design and construction. And then we began the testing, and that was a multi-year effort. So throughout that whole process, there has been engagement all along, and we've been working with the community and the council and the mayor. Next slide. So in 2017, we did 7 listening sessions with the community, as well as a big intensive design charrette. And this is just a quick slide to show you who was involved in the process. Many people have had input from way back in 2017. So this includes electeds, city staff, advocacy groups, and community groups, both neighborhood and citywide. Next slide. So I want to talk just a bit about our approach, shared street design approach to frame up the testing and results. Next slide. So this is a very wonky slide, and I'm not going to go into detail and because for the sake of time, but I just want to emphasize that streets are really designed to balance mobility and access. So on this chart, A street that is really about mobility is a freeway. It's just getting people from A to B. And streets that are really about access may be the street that you live on. It's mostly just homes, and it's really just for people who need to get to those spots. So every street is a balance of mobility and access. And this is really important to this project in the way that Bannock is part of the larger street network for both bicycles and cars and pedestrians. Next slide. So with that mobility versus accessibility, or excuse me, access lens, I want to walk you through some of the corridor context. First, looking at transportation. So there are high comfort bikeways on parallel streets on all the surrounding, on parallel routes to Bannock on all the surrounding streets. And this is a clip of the ACHD bike map. And you can see in blue and green, those high comfort streets. For cars, Bannock really functions like an alley. There are actually no destinations for cars on that corridor. People do use it to go back and forth between the parking areas and as in other ways, but it's not a major street. There are other streets surrounding that are much faster and easier and more on that mobility spectrum. And really the street has limited connectivity to the east. It kind of dead ends just past Avenue B at the cemetery. So it's not a huge through street. Next slide. So in terms of access and land use, there are a lot of pedestrian activity generators. That's the transportation term for destinations. And you can see from this diagram we did with on our observations, the green line shows where people walk. The thing about this corridor is that none of the building entries align. So you can see that people do travel back and forth, but they're also going back and forth in this way and that way. And it was really difficult to identify any single crossing mixing zone. So we let it be organic, and that is in keeping with how shared streets are designed and intended to work. I think it's really important to recognize too that this is a really unique setting with vulnerable users. That's what we call people walking and biking. But that term is really even more appropriate here given the context with the hospital. And finally, the corridor has historically provided open space and gathering areas for both the hospital and the community, and that was a really valued function. Next slide. So for the reasons I just walked you through, we chose a shared street design. They're called pedestrian priority streets. They go by different names. And I pulled a few quotes from some design guidance here to emphasize that these are really streets with high pedestrian volumes, low vehicle volumes, and you're able to either reduce those volumes or discourage those to emphasize the pedestrian priority. And they're really a response to making the street more friendly for people biking and walking. Cars can still go through, but they're part of a mix and pedestrians are the priority. Madam Mayor, I don't recall, but I can get that information to you. Yes, next slide. So this is a screen grab from that shared accessible shared street document that I mentioned that we worked on. Shared streets really work by removing all the segregation between the modes, as it's called. So whether that's curbs, whether that's curbs that create sidewalks, striping, everything is all on one plane. You remove signs, you remove traffic control, and that forces people to interact, to make eye contact and to interact with everyone. It also is very important to indicate to cars that they need to travel slowly through this area, and there are typically gateway treatments. For example, the raised crossings at either end of this corridor or other kinds of traffic calming. So next slide. So we'll move on to the testing summary and results. Next slide. So the council resolution asked us to measure 4 things: the existence, location, and severity of the conflicts between all corridor users, the speed and safety of bicyclists. There was a particular concern about the parking garage entries and what kind of conflicts there might be there, and then the mixing zones. Next slide. So We know that data does not tell the whole story. So we designed a testing methodology that included the typical tools of transportation engineering. So speed and volume data for cars and bikes, and incident reports, collision reports. We also used qualitative data. So we went out and observed the corridor. We used video to see what was going on. But again, even qualitative data doesn't tell the whole story. So we knew that public input would be quite critical. And we developed some comment cards that we used. I'll talk about those in a moment, and a survey. So with these three things, that gave us a picture of how the corridor is functioning. Next slide. So we had planned 6 observational visits that were intended to be within a year, and then the 6th one at the 1-year mark. Some things happened between 2019 and now. But we were able to go out and be there in differing weathering conditions, different activity levels. In response to our engagement with ENA, they asked us to extend the testing period, which we did. We ended up extending it even longer than they had requested. They asked us to observe the corridor during outlaw field events, which we did. And then we also did a temporary closure of Jefferson. So we did a lot of different kinds of visits in different conditions. We also worked with the city and Compass to employ count data. And then I mentioned the comment cards. We had those on the corridor while we were out there observing. We had them available on the corridor at other times. They were in the hospital. We collected those, compiled that data, and analyzed it. And then the city of Boise hosted an online survey, and I believe ENA also hosted one. Next slide. All right, so let me catch up with my notes. What did we learn? So we learned that, yes, pedestrians are the major user at almost 80%. At times, there could be thousands of people using the corridor in one day. There's a steady trickle, and then there are big surges as shift changes. Drivers are about 17% of the users, so that's about 500 cars a day. And bikes are at 4%, about 50 users a day. Next slide. So we looked at travel both along the corridor and across the corridor. And I've summarized our points here. You can see that most drivers do move really slowly in the corridor and yield to other users. That may shift over time as people become more comfortable using the corridor and understand how it works better. Bikes volumes are low, speeds are not a concern. They seem to work quite well in the corridor. And we do know that while speeding is not super prevalent, speeding is always an issue on any street. There are always going to be those outliers who go 80 miles an hour down the street. We haven't encountered that, but there have been some higher speeds, but they do seem to be kind of edging up over time, and that's a concern. And I think a really important point is that when you're walking along the corridor, a car passing you at 12 miles an hour, that can feel really fast because you're right there with the car. There's no separation. So,
do you have any sense of whether or not it's hospital guests, patrons, whoever that are driving through this?
Madam Mayor,
or
that's
if
a great
it's
question.
through traffic.
Yeah, we did not do what they call an origin and destination study to know who the users were. They did appear to be mostly regular folks in cars, very few delivery vehicles. So,
Okay.
yeah, thanks. Next slide. So pedestrians traveling along and across the corridor. This has been an evolution. Despite there being other shared streets in Boise, they all look and feel a little different and operate a little different. So people at first were quite confused and didn't know that they needed to yield to cars. So there was a lot of confusion, a lot of lack of caution. Over time, people have gotten the hang of it and they look out for cars more. But I think there remains some discomfort with that disorganized movement. That's kind of how it's supposed to work. People all need to be cautious. So, and then finally, we know that the gathering spaces are well used, and people from our public comments have mentioned that they really appreciate them. Next slide. So to give you a sense of kind of some of the input that we got, this slide, strangely enough, the agree is on the left and the disagree is on the right, kind of backwards to most surveys. But the top image shows that when we started out, we asked people, was the corridor attractive, welcoming, easy to travel, comfortable, safe? Most people were mostly in the neutral zone to maybe a little bit in disagreement. And 2 years later, that's really shifted toward the agree. There are people still on the fence about the safety, but we're definitely above the neutral zone. So next slide. Just a few quotes from people. I tried to pick a random assortment, but ones that kind of demonstrate that people really are concerned about cars in the corridor. They are not many people are not comfortable with it and concerned about their safety, but a lot of people do appreciate the corridor, especially the gathering spaces. Next slide.
Madam Mayor. I guess just a question about that last quote and then the corresponding slide, I think in front of it. Are most of the safety concerns due to pedestrians concerned about the vehicles? Does that seem to be, a through point?
Madam Mayor, Council President, yes, that is the case. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have a question about what is the history here about why we allow cars there? Could I be brought up to speed on that?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, that is a long history that I'm not sure I can answer that. There was a lot of.
I'm happy to say a couple of things. I was on
Please do,
council when
Madam
this was decided. So there was a lot of discussion about the impact that the closure of Jefferson would have on through traffic. And so as the council looked at, and the mayor at the time looked at options, and we knew that at some point Jefferson would be closed, but Bannock could be open, we asked them to do a study that looked at all uses to see if it would work for a shared street with cars, people on foot, people on bikes, as an alternative for people that had historically taken Jefferson to get from one side of the East End into downtown. And so that's why you're here, because
Yes.
you did the study with all of the uses at play, so that they could come back to us and share with us how it worked, whether it worked before an easement was granted, which is what's happening today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All right, so wrapping up, here's how our testing shows the corridor performs in response to the council resolution. So in terms of user conflicts, none have been reported. That may shift over time as vehicles grow more comfortable with the corridor or maybe traffic patterns change. Right now, it's not a concern. Bicyclist speeds and operations, not a concern. They seem to be meshing well with all users. Conflicts at the parking garage, at the access points, that is a concern. The way the corridor is laid out, drivers enter the corridor right where people exit and enter the parking garage. So as people are transitioning from the regular street to the shared street, they meet at a shift change, a surge of pedestrians coming out. But again, so far, no conflicts, but people need to continue to be aware. And as vehicles, if vehicle speeds increase over time, that could be an issue, but it hasn't been so much right now. And then in terms of the adequacy of the mixing zones, we did not actually design mixing zones because it was too hard to organize people into one space, but it does seem to be working all right. And we do notice that people walk where there's available space. So if there's nobody on the corridor, pedestrians will spread out. If there are other users like a car or bicyclist, pedestrians tend to move aside. So really, and that's kind of true for as people are moving across the corridor. During the shift changes, when there are lots of people just march right through. At other times, they're more aware and slow and observant. So next slide. So in our final analysis, the shared street is working as intended. Tool Design's position is that The land use context here is very unique. It's a really access-oriented street. And the primary users of this corridor are also very unique, being a hospital setting. And we feel really strongly that the corridor should be safe for those primary users, the pedestrians. St. Luke's position is that cars can remain, and we are okay with that as long as speeds are monitored and there may be a need to add some design interventions in terms of additional signage, speed limit signs that would help manage speeds. And that is the end of my presentation, and I'm ready for questions.
Any questions for Kristen?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I think I have 3 questions for you. So first, Jefferson's not closed yet. Do we think that that has anything to do with a lower percentage of bicyclists going through, and that might change when Jefferson actually closes, when we were looking at that kind of breakdown on percentages?
Madam Mayor, Council President, we did a simulation, as I mentioned, of Jefferson being closed and did not notice a huge difference. That could be the case. But as I mentioned before, the cycle tracks as well as the streets really provide a more direct, fast route. And this is really just a half a block. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Second question. So maybe it's anecdotal. One of the things that I've heard from people riding bikes, it's the crossing on Broadway or Avenue B that kind of makes it a little weird, where you're like, boom, like a really sharp 90-degree turn. And like, if you're a little kid, maybe you can do it. But that may be, one of the issues as well. Did you get any response, when doing surveys and checking in with folks, if that was an issue that people had brought up?
Madam Mayor, Council President, do you mean where Bannock and Avenue B intersect?
Yes.
And that pedestrian crossing island?
Yep, the crossing island.
Yes. That's a tough spot. In an ideal world, that design would look different. But we did not, we were involved we did the design for that little segment of the cycle track between Avenue A and Avenue B, but that segment was not part of our observations. And we did not, to my knowledge, get any comments about that intersection.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested in looking into that, because as ACHD does their Bannock study that actually creates, a pathway from Bannock all the way over to like 17th Street, almost all the way over to the penitentiary. There may be some changes there. And I guess my last question, maybe this is for you, or maybe from someone from St. Luke's. Is there any benefit for St. Luke's having vehicles actually drive through? I mean, is there like a nice aspect of like, oh, somebody can drop somebody off in front of this place really close?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it not actually a great benefit to have cars going through?
Mm-hmm. Madam Mayor, Council President, I think that, as I said before, there aren't any destinations on the corridor, and it is easy for cars to drop off like closer to the entries on either end. So there's not a reason. It does provide convenience. You can cut through, but again, it's not fast. You're having to negotiate with other users, so it might be, like sometimes it is convenient to take an alley, but if you're really trying to get somewhere, it's not the best route. If you're trying to get somewhere quickly and efficiently, it's not the best route.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to drive.
So
down there
that was
in my
more,
vehicle.
excuse me, that was more factual.
And I guess one of the reasons why I asked that is you're talking about a shared street design, and that sort of uncomfortableness or unpredictability, like that's a feature of the design. It causes people to kind of slow down and pay attention. And then just, the counterbalance to that is like, sure would be nice if people didn't feel uncomfortable and didn't have to, worry about a vehicle going through. And so I guess just in my head, as I'm thinking about, is there a functional purpose for vehicles driving through there for St. Luke's, in somebody being able to drop off, where if that wasn't available, that would be a large issue for St. Luke's?
Mm-hmm.
We can David, come on up for, I need you in the mic so we can get it for the record.
Madam Mayor, Council President Halliburton. There's really no needed use for vehicle traffic. There's other ways. And again, I guess because a patient taking my kid to the emergency department, I wouldn't have used Bannock. I use Avenue B and come that way. So there's no drop off area there. Most of the pedestrian activity you see, you have individuals that are going from the hospital into the South Tower for meetings, or you have patients that are going into the South Tower for clinic appointments. You don't typically see patient drop off because it's not a convenient location. Typically, patients will use the parking garage. You don't typically see your Grubhub staff often use the emergency area for the Grubhub and the deliveries. So in an ideal world, there wouldn't be those cars. It would be just a mixing area for cyclists and pedestrians. I think it's a concession that was made.
That's helpful. And, there might be follow-up, but I'll leave it open to someone else. We got a limited amount of time, but thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, can I just make a comment? I didn't know this was a contentious issue in the past, and I didn't know the city had anything to do with it. Right in the kind of the corner there, before you go into the hospital off to the left, is the pediatric cancer treatment. My son gets treatments there every other month, and last treatment, my wife and I were holding his hand walking, and a car came out right in front of us right before we were getting ready to go in. And it was surprising to me because I didn't know we let cars through there, and I didn't expect a car to come from there. And I imagine there are other families that feel the same way. I think about all the times that I go to the hospital. It's usually for his treatments when he's hospitalized, or when my wife had a baby. Those are times when I'm not going to be looking for cars. So I don't know the history of this business as well as others. I'm just speaking from personal experience. I don't want to see cars there. So don't know what that will take, but just want to share that.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
I mean, it's crazy to think that this has now been 5 years since you started the study. And given all that we have all gone through, it makes sense, of course, but it's great to have you back and to see this, and really appreciate all the attention that you and your firm put into this, as well as St. Luke's put into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jordan Heller.
Jordan, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I appreciate the chance to be in front of you today to speak about the easement itself, and I'll provide some context for that easement to fold on to the information that Dennis and Kristen and Chris shared as well. The easement, as we've discussed, is to allow public movement through Bannock, which runs in front of what is currently the front door of St. Luke's Boise Hospital. And this follows a plan that we set back in 2015 through a public process. I want to take a moment just to situate us in that master plan. The 2015 master plan contemplates 4 phases of construction for this investment in our community. The first phase is the Children's Hospital, or Children's Pavilion, as we call it. Next is the central plant and shipping and receiving, really the infrastructure to power this new, more modern hospital. The third phase is the hospital and the renderings that Dennis shared, the new, more modern facility and that North Tower. And then finally, the fourth phase is renovations of our existing facility. So within the context of this plan that we set in 2015, the plan itself contemplates that to move from phase 2 to phase 3 is in order to build over Jefferson. In exchange, St. Luke's will grant this public access easement. And I want to try to answer a few council questions in the process here. This 2015 plan does contemplate, I'll just read from the plan itself. The corridor may be also designed to allow automobile access if deemed appropriate by the city of Boise. So that's certainly a decision that we've reached through years of public engagement and process that we'll speak a little bit about, and something that St. Luke certainly wants to defer to our agreements and the plan that we've laid out together. Next slide, please. So just to recap that plan and those agreements, the 2015 master plan really lays out this concept of a shared space, mobility, and the concept that St. Luke's will grant an easement, and that St. Luke's and city staff will together propose this easement to the city. And we are grateful for the chance to have worked together with city staff to make that proposed easement that we are submitting today. This plan is then reiterated in our 2016 letter agreement, which further outlines the aspects of the easement. The shared space itself was developed through those series of multiple public meetings, public input, community input, input of experts to develop and design this shared space throughout that 2017 to 2019 period, and then subjected to a documented testing protocol reviewed through the public process as well, that the city approved in 2019. Then it was applied. And so for this period, and we've had the chance to test this for an even longer period than we initially intended, but appreciate, as Kristen laid out, the work that Tool has done to apply those rigorous testing protocols to the corridor to assess its use, and have taken the input that Tool Design has shared with St. Luke's about how the corridor could be improved, particularly given the multimodal use of transport. So that's all gone into the easement that we're presenting today, and that incorporates that feedback and follows that plan. Next slide, please. The easement that we're presenting today is in response to, again, the plan as adopted in Council Resolution, City's Resolution 28419, which contemplated that St. Luke's and the city staff would propose to mayor and council an easement and the final configuration for the corridor and the location of this 28-foot wide easement. I want to note that we are making some changes in light of the feedback from Tool. There had not been the posted speed limit in the service of encouraging all users to be aware of other users and for no one user to have priority over another. But we did understand the feedback from Tool that notwithstanding their preference or I guess question to say there's not necessarily a reason for there to be cars in the corridor, but if the city determines that that's appropriate, and if we decide to proceed with that, here are the ways that that can be done safely. And so we've taken that feedback from Tool to add posted speed limits to keep those speeds lower, and also to increase the signage for awareness that this is a shared space for all users. And those have not all of those improvements were present during all of the testing. That's part of what's come out of the testing that we've added and are in the process of adding. Next slide, please. The easement itself runs across approximately 2-block span of Bannock, and it's depicted here. It's 28 feet wide for the length of those 2 blocks. And then for the portion that's between First Street, the whole easement runs from First Street to Avenue B, but for the portion between First Street and what was previously Avenue A, that's where the shared space is. And that's a 10-foot wide portion specifically documented in the easement to designate that as shared use. This easement provides that and preserves that access in perpetuity under this easement, but St. Luke's maintains responsibility for maintaining the area, paying for snow removal and maintenance and so forth. And the easement also requires St. Luke's to do that with materials that are in keeping with the documented configuration in this easement and of like materials or as good quality materials. So it really preserves that space. And I think the intent that arose from the public process in this document. The next slide, please. The easement also contains this rendering or incorporates this rendering that shows the various aspects of design meant to accommodate this multimodal use and also make really, I think, a beautiful space for our community and the many types of visitors who come to the hospital. This easement, as we've discussed, it's the next step in St. Luke's investment in modernizing our hospital and really investing in this connected facility for the benefit of our community. And that's what we are together with city staff presenting to council today. And Madam Mayor, with that, I stand for any questions.
Thanks, Jordan.
Going to give everyone else a chance to go first. So I do have some questions for you. So with this, with these proposed corridor improvements, is there a significant cost that's being invested into this, or is it sort of maintaining what it is right about now with the addition, I think it sounds like, of some signs, or is there actually a fair amount of construction that's going on to get it to this proposed easement design?
St. Luke's has invested significant dollars in achieving the corridor that is there today. It's built, and so there'll be ongoing maintenance to maintain that space and its condition. But the investment to build it has already been made. Yes.
So I think so other than maybe some additions to some signs or some slight traffic calming measures to, I think, reduce the speeds, there's not an additional large amount of investment other than just the maintenance of the space.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Jordan. Do you have a sense of what the signage might look like? I think to our prior comments, maybe about still concerns around safety. Is it signage that will kind of dampen the amount of traffic or drivers that will go through, or is it really more about awareness to pedestrians that there might be drivers going through? I'm just curious what that might look like.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Haney Keith. The signage that we have right now includes photographic or sort of stick figure renderings of bicycle, cars, pedestrian, wheelchair users on a sign that's posted both on both sides of the shared use portion of that corridor. So on First Street and on the Avenue A side. And in light of the feedback today, I think there's an opportunity to consider more places for signage, given that there isn't just one or two entrances, and the signs really are directed to cars right now. But I think there's an opportunity to consider additional ways of awareness. The intent is not to discourage any particular mode of transit per se, although I do think any user for the space is, we want them to come sort of aware of other users and respectful of other users. And if someone's in a great hurry, that's probably not the space for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, so you're going to give the easement, and then there's going to be, I assume, more conversations about how the space is used. I guess what I'm asking is, lurking in the room right now is this should cars be there question. And I guess I don't understand, does it matter right now? You're going to give us the easement, and then I assume the city in the future could make some decisions about who's going to be there. So that it's obviously an issue, but do we need to tackle that to think about what you need in terms of what easement to give us?
Madam Mayor, Council President Pro Tem Badgett, that you're correct. So we can move forward with the easement as drafted. The easement contemplates that the parties through the appropriate process, can evaluate the corridor. And if that's a decision, certainly based on input from the city, we can certainly evaluate that. But we would ask to move forward with the easement so that we can continue that construction on our hospital. Thank you.
Thank you.
But you'd prefer to have it move forward as written and then the city to evaluate once with you as we're in the process moving like beyond tonight.
Before I respond, Madam Mayor, I'm going to turn around and validate that,
Great.
yes, we would.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I might just make one comment here. One, I appreciate your willingness to explore leaving the corridor open to traffic, and you working with the East End Neighborhood Association, all the parties involved to explore all options and see what's going to work for folks. Right now, ACHD is in the middle of doing the Bannock Street neighborhood concept, and it actually extends from 27th Street, like all the way down almost to Old Penitentiary Road. And they're taking input on it right now, all the way until the end, I think, of 2023, with plans on what that whole corridor is going to look like. And so, my personal opinion is now is a good time to proceed as planned with the easement, but for staff to be evaluating as this larger Bannock Street neighborhood concept is explored, how that might change that street in the future. And hopefully St. Luke's, is there. And I think it's outlined in the easement to be a partner in making sure that that works. But if there's no reason to make a decision that's different now, if there's a larger plan that's happening, and those should really be part, I think, of the same plan.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I agree completely. I would just add that as staff is preparing things, the marching orders would be persuade me why cars should be there. We can have that conversation later, but I'm not, we talk about this all the time, like these mixed pedestrian, the numbers just don't support a need for vehicles to be moving through that place. But you can see how much work has gone into this. I know there are stakeholders who are not here in the room. There's no reason to rock the boat on getting your easement done so that you can continue construction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I want to thank you all for coming in and great review of where we've been. Appreciate all the work that's gone into the development of the corridor as it is and as it's been the last several years. And then the easement agreements that you worked on with staff. Really appreciate it. And it's good to see you all here tonight. Thanks for being here. And with that, we'll go ahead and recess until 6 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.